Some time ago, I had a video about tea notes in fragrances. And if you remember, I ended it with a promise of doing the review of the brand called State of Mind. And today is the day. The brand makes tea blends, and in parallel, they create fragrances that are supposed to reflect those tea notes. And as much as I love perfumes, I'm also a very big lover of tea. And I don't even know which part I was excited about more, perfumes or teas. I met the team of the brand for a little tea time, and I also got a chance to sample some fragrances. And they were really kind to provide me with the 12 samples of their collection and 12 different teas that match the perfumes. But first of all, I would like to break for a little video of unpackaging process. I quite never do those, but I appreciated the effort of this box being put for me, and I think it's worth demonstrating how they do their branding. I decided to start this presentation with a fragrance that is called Lem Slav, Slavic soul. Ethnically, I don't have Slavic roots, but I grew up in Russia and I do have something Slavic in my soul. And that is probably something in common that we have with the owner of the brand, Catherine Laskin-Balandino. She was born in Belarus and then she moved to France. Lem Slav is the only fragrance that has a French name. Unfortunately, this was not the fragrance I liked. And the main reason for it is the amber base. This is a kind of modern amber I dislike, but I know that it will find its fans, and a lot of people, they do like this kind of woody modern ambers. The beginning of the fragrance is a little bit masculine, fresh, with a tiny little sweetness somewhere that starts growing. And that amber base is not something shocking from the beginning, but it starts coming out very quickly, expanding and conquering the entire composition. And the time when I like it is just before that amber base starts getting strength. That's the time when I feel a little bit of honey that is not really sweet, more like spiced, and something very light floral. But then very quickly, the fragrance starts moving towards dislike. And that's the time when it takes that woody character. It's not surprising to find a cedarwood, birch tree, sandalwood in the description of this amber base. When it comes to tea, the tea note that inspired this fragrance is puer. And I was a bit surprised with this choice because a lot of people in Europe associate Russia with something like Earl Grey. Many French brands, for example, when they put word Russian in it, there's always bergamot in there. The TM Slav of the brand was actually one of my favorite teas in the collection. A typical puer would have the notes of wet soil and mushrooms. These notes are very thin. Most people drinking puer would not even feel these notes, but Lem Slav as a tea has a bit of more interesting going on in here. The sweet notes were not overly sweet for me. They were just little nuances, and I really liked it this way. Even the honey was not feeling like actual honey that you put in your tea in Russia, but it was feeling more like that wax of honey that you chew and you spit it out. And I still do get that mushroomy flavor that I associate with dried mushrooms hanging on a string somewhere in a room before entering a Russian banya. So overall, the experience of drinking tea brought a lot of Slavic memories, and I think the name Lem Slav is really well deserved by this tea. It does make sense to find puer in the description of the fragrance because the fragrance does have a woody character towards the dry down. But it's not the kind of fragrance that you smell and you say, wow, this smells like tea. So I would say the link between the fragrance and the tea is not the strongest one in this particular pairing. The next fragrance is Creative Inspiration. And when I looked at the notes, I was thinking this should be my favorite perfume. But unfortunately, it was not the case. So the notes are really the notes that I would love. I love oolong tea. I like a bit of rice and iris and a bit of spices. But unfortunately, these notes, they did not play out the way I was imagining. Sometimes I get a comment that I should try fragrances on my skin. It might not look like that on the videos that I make, because sometimes on the video I would spray them on a blotter or on some paper. And the reality is I always do try them on my skin, and not just once. So before making the video, I usually try them on a paper, on a blotter first. Then I try them far from my face, somewhere on my elbow, for example, or on my knee. And then if I like it, I spray it on my neck or on my wrists. So I do have experience of wearing a fragrance several times, different days, before making this review, before making a full opinion about it. So it's not the first time I'm wearing it. I did wear it already on my neck. I really love the smell of this fragrance at the beginning. It's a light floral, slightly powdery, a bit citrusy. It's really something that I would expect from the notes. I would not say that the tea note, oolong tea specifically, is very prominent, but when you see it in the pyramid, you can fantasize that it's here. While I'm enjoying the opening of the fragrance, it starts fading away very quickly, while the powdery note becomes stronger. This is not a iris kind of powder. This is more of a synthetic baby powder, Nivea cream type of thing. I would say that this fragrance is made for people who love powdery fragrances. Don't be worried about the spicy elements, because they are barely noticeable. I would not even say that this is a spicy powder. It really is soft powdery, and even the tea note is just a hint of it at the beginning. It's really not a tea fragrance. On my skin, it projects for maybe half an hour, and then it lasts 30 minutes more, like when you smell really close. But basically in 1 hour you would have to reapply it. Now let's see how creatively inspiring the tea creative inspiration is. Oolong tea does not need water at a boiling temperature. It has to be approximately at the level of 90-95 Celsius. When you open the tea bag, it already gives you all the nice aromas. In the description we have bergamot, pink pepper, licorice, and jasmine. That will be the description of the flavors of the tea. 5 minutes later, my tea is ready for tasting. I would say that this is not a typical oolong that I'm used to. Oolong that I usually drink is called milky oolong. This one has a different profile of flavors. The tea feels woody, like dried chips of oak. Another note that I'm getting in here is lipstick. Iris is often used in fragrances to imitate the smell of lipstick. Here we don't have iris, but I don't know, somehow I'm catching this lipstick flavor, which honestly I'm not a big fan, but a lot of people might find it interesting, and that's where the link might be to the fragrance. And then out of all notes that are listed in the description, I would say licorice is the one that is more guessable. The next fragrance is Secret of Success. I've already tried it, of course. The beginning is leaning more towards masculine side. It feels more cologne-like, more herbaceous kind of fragrance. And at the same time, there are some elements that create this aura of a herbal pharmacy. It's like you walk into a pharmacy where they sell herbal teas. It's not a very strong fragrance. It has some spiciness in here. That pimento, the red pepper that I saw in Creative Inspiration, I would expect to see it in Secret of Success, but the spices are not listed in here. So I assume that could be the combination of cinnamon, rosemary, and cardamom. Despite that they are not individually so bright, but this combo makes it spicy, herbal at the same time. Also, you know, you have a classical pyramid when you have the top, the middle, and the bottom, and you expect them to be opening up to you in that order. The thing is, here it doesn't really work this way. Woody, citrusy, tea-like core of the fragrance is becoming more prominent towards the dry down of the fragrance. I would not call it oud fragrance. I would say that out of all 12 fragrances, this one is where you really do feel the tea element. It certainly is very unique. It's hard to describe, and I do like it as a creation. The tea secret of success has sencha tea. Is a very delicate Japanese tea. Certainly do not put hot boiling water over it. You need some time for water to cool down before you put your tea in there. While my water is cooling down, I'll tell you something about the packaging. Secret of Success was the only tea that I got in 2 different formats. I got it in this paper bag in loose format, and I got it in a tea bag in this kind of format. The reason I'm bringing your attention to this is because this format is not very good for tasting. The problem is that the paper has its own kind of aroma, which is mostly woody, and it is absorbed by all the teas, because most of the teas I got in these paper bags, and only a few teas I got in bags that you can put in your water. Usually I prefer loose tea, but in this case, these tea bags are much better for tasting because you actually get the flavor of the tea versus the flavor of this paper. And I'm gonna dip my tea bag in here. One note that I did not mention, speaking about the fragrance, was vanilla. And vanilla is not present in the fragrance as vanilla itself. It feels more like a light sweetness that starts coming towards the dry down. And I actually like the dry down, maybe also due to that sweetness. When it comes to the tea, the moment I put my tea bag in the water, I have that sweetness that feels more like vanilla versus the fragrance. Unlike black teas, sencha needs only 3 minutes for brewing. And it's good to drink it while it's freshly brewed. Don't wait for more than 9-10 minutes. I think in Japan they have a saying that tea has a short life when the antioxidants are the most beneficial to your body. I think that life is like 9 minutes if I'm not wrong. So my tea is ready for tasting. Smelling it, I really love smelling it. I actually wish that the fragrance smelled more like this tea, because the herbal elements that feel more pharmaceutical in the fragrance, they are not feeling pharmaceutical in this tea. While vanilla and cinnamon blended together into very delicate sweetness, they complement sencha tea and maybe smoothen the edges of sencha tea, because pure sencha tea could be a bit on the swampy side, I would say. At the same time, there is something earthy and even mushroomy about it, like a floor of a wet forest kind of note, which doesn't disturb me, and most tea lovers would be okay with that note. The main shop of the State of Mind is not just a boring boutique. This is a space where you can have a cup of tea, taste different fragrances, and enjoy your friends and your company. Unfortunately, I was not able to visit this space myself, so I decided to have a little tea ceremony at home with my friends. I decided to open our little tea ceremony with a tea and a fragrance called Open Mind. I was very excited to try Gyokuro tea that I had never tried before. This tea is one of the Grand Cru of the collection, and it has a really intriguing description. I cannot say that the flavor and the smell of alg is my favorite, but I was still very curious to experience it. So when we had the tea, on the level of like and dislike, we were leaning more towards dislike. The word sweetness is somewhere in the description, but I would not say that there is any sweetness in this tea. It really gives you a feeling of steaminess and wet grass, which according to the description is actually alg. And alg makes much more sense. There are several Japanese teas that have the taste of alg, and many of them are really good for you, but they are not the kind of tea that a lot of people like. So when we moved to the fragrance, that was a totally opposite reaction. The beginning was like, wow, everybody loved it. But the fragrance is kind of tricky. The opening and the base, they are on the 2 different spectrums.
Мне нравится, что есть свежие ноты. Вот, и то, что он такой юнисекс.
One adjective that we all agreed on was fresh. The fragrance was really nice, fresh, easy, light, airy, but then it started developing into the direction that not everyone appreciated. In the pyramid, we see notes that could give you an impression of having something fruity or floral, but in reality, the fragrance feels more green, aromatic, slightly woody. I was even sure that there is a note of salt in here. So when we read the description, it is supposed to give you a feeling of a sea breeze. And I think the perfumer did a really great job imitating that smell of the sea. As a base, I get a very strong sense of like leathery, woody galbanum. That's why I say it's a big contrast. I really love the opening, but not the end. It also behaves in a kind of unusual way in terms of intensity. Most of the fragrances, they are intense from the beginning and then they start fading down and intensity decreases, sometimes slowly, sometimes more drastically. What we have here is that the opening is really delicate and then there is a base note that starts gaining strength. So it actually becomes stronger and stronger towards the end. The notes from the description that you could actually feel in the fragrance are hinoki, chrysanthemum, and blue cypress. Those are probably the ones that stand out the most. When it comes to the connection with the actual tea, I would say that both the tea and the fragrance have the note of algue. The second tea that we tried was the sense of humor. And this tea is the mix of yerba mate and Darjeeling. Darjeeling is a kind of tea I drink very frequently. I really love the way it smells. This tea, the sense of humor, was a little tricky. When you smell it off the jar, you smell yerba mate a bit more than Darjeeling. But when you make the tea, when you're drinking it, yerba mate goes on the background while Darjeeling becomes more prominent. And when it comes to the fragrance, to me there is a kind of disconnect between the description and the fragrance. In my opinion, and my girlfriends agreed with me, this fragrance is obviously citrusy.
Я чувствую мандарин. Точно?
А чай чувствуешь?
Нет.
There is mandarin in the description that could be easily guessed, but there is no lime or lemon, and this is what I get in here almost from the beginning to the end. I do feel the tea note in this fragrance, but I don't feel it as a black Darjeeling. I feel it more like a generic green tea, which is already great because I do love tea notes in perfumes. Citrusy fragrances is probably my least favorite category, but this one is really hard not to like. It's not the usual citrus, there is still something interesting going on. Sense of humor was more of a like for everybody, but we noticed that out of 5 fragrances that we tried, this one has the most intimate projection and it doesn't last as long as the others. When we finished our tea ceremony in 2-3 hours, we smelled again all the blotters and the sense of humor was practically gone. You could smell it really, really closely, and at that point it gives more of a woody base with a little touch of osmanthus. That's what you get at the end, but it just stays very, very close to your skin. But certainly it'd be great for people who love light, vibrant perfumes, especially in the citrusy category. The third pairing that we tried was Natural Elegance, and we absolutely loved the tea. This is a green Yunnan that has a really distinct smell of tropical fruits. According to the description, we're supposed to get osmanthus, peaches, apricots, and fruity tones, but I'll tell you more. This really smells like tropical fruits, especially mango to my nose. So the tea was absolute love for everyone. Then we tried the fragrance Natural Elegance. And here it was a little bit of a divide between likes and dislikes. I think we were partially disappointed because we did not get the same tropical fruits that we got in the tea. The fragrance Natural Elegance is actually dominated by the smell of apricots and osmanthus. And in perfumeries, they actually use the same chemical element for both. I know it makes no sense that apricots and osmanthus are the same thing, but they are. So sometimes in fragrances we see them as apricots, sometimes we see them as osmanthus. In the case of the sense of humor, I think they used the same chemical as well, and they put peaches in the pyramid. So here this element is really strong, and that really defines the sweetness. If we speak about the connection of the fragrance and the tea, I would say that here I do feel the tea note, but I don't necessarily feel it as the same kind of tea that I tried before. If I was smelling this before reading the notes, I would say that this smells more like a jasmine tea, which is actually really lovely. Meanwhile, the perfumer still tried to make it unisex, and I think some gentlemen could wear it, but among my girlfriends we agreed that this is more of a perfume for ladies, and not for young girls, but really for ladies. Another note that I was pretty much sure to find in here was tuberose. Tuberose is not a part of the description, but somehow in the air I do catch that tuberose. So I think tuberose lovers would appreciate this fragrance. When it comes to the base, it's mostly ambroxan that is not very standoffish. Even patchouli that we see in here is really weak, which is very rare for patchouli. The next pairing we tried was Spontaneous Generosity. The fragrance is definitely made for those who like something sweet. And it was not the case for one of my girlfriends. She immediately said no, not for me. But I appreciated those sweet notes that made me think of homemade confitures. And the notes are cherry and fig. Confitures make me think about tea drinking, but the fragrance itself did not have a strong tea note. Nonetheless, I still really liked the fragrance, and I even got myself a travel spray of 10 ml. The packaging is not the most practical one, not so easy to open. So here is the spray Spontaneous Generosity. It was beautiful, beautiful for Christmas time. An interesting thing about Spontaneous Generosity is that it sounded very different on a blotter versus my skin. When I was wearing it, something interesting happened to the amber base. And perfumes can be tricky depending on your skin chemistry. So this amber base, instead of giving more woody sandalwood and caramel that I was smelling on a blotter, I was getting cinnamon and honey. And these two notes could also be associated with certain ambers, so I believe we could find them in here. And it was not a very light honey note, it was really, really strong. When it comes to tea, we have Black Assam. Black Assam is a pretty strong kind of tea, and I usually drink it just plain as it is. Here I was very curious how all these notes will play out. Supposedly we have tonka, fig, grapes, and caramel notes in this tea. To be honest, I did not feel them so much. I could smell something interesting and sweet when I smelled the tea, but I could not taste any notes when I was drinking my tea. It felt more like a regular Assam tea, which is totally fine for me because I like my Assam without extraordinary flavors. And the last tea we had, and we left it for desserts, was called Butterfly Mind. And I was sure that would be the fragrance that would be appreciated by my girlfriends the most, because this one is more girly, it's very modern, and it's something that is really easy to like. Butterfly Mind is the only white tea of the brand, and it's not the kind of tea that I drink very frequently, but I really enjoyed drinking this one. According to the description, we have the notes of sakura and an exotic fruit of feijoa. This is a fruit that not so many people know. If you look at the scent profile, very often they say that it tastes like pineapple and strawberries. But in reality, I think it tastes more like kiwis. It definitely tastes like something very sour to me. In any case, feijoa note sounded very exciting to me because I do love this fruit, but I did not find it in my tea, and I definitely did not find it in my fragrance. If Butterfly Mind tea has something tropical, exotic in the flavors, especially in the smell when you just smell it off the jar, but it's more generic tropical fruits. So when it comes to the fragrance, I barely get any tropical fruits, any exotic flavors in here. To me, it mostly smells like cherry blossom, sakura if you wish, and something like a shower gel with a flavor of sakura. Or it might feel like a lotion that you put on yourself with a flavor of cherries and sakura. Anyways, it has a musky base, it's very light, airy, really great for younger girls. And I think the twin of this is an entire line by L'Occitane that is called Cherry Blossom. So if you're a fan of this Japanese theme around cherry blossom time, this would be something you would appreciate. But don't hope to find any fei joie in here. There's one fragrance in the collection that features 3 different kinds of tea at the same time, and it's called Modern Nomad. And the teas that we have in here are grilled hojicha tea, lapsang souchong, and pu'er. Sounds like quite a mix. The fragrance is described as woody leather, but I did not feel it as such. In my opinion, it is mostly a patchouli fragrance. And when I looked at the notes like leather, patchouli, amber, oud, I was thinking it's gonna be quite a strong mess. In reality, the fragrance is really strong indeed. It's one of the strongest fragrances in the collection, but it is not as dirty and messy as it seems. To me, it feels mostly like a transparent kind of patchouli, supported by modern ambers, probably transparent ambroxan, and mostly featuring the rose. Meanwhile, I would say that the fragrance has more of a masculine vibe. So imagine this is a transparent, rosy patchouli for men. That's how I would describe it. When it comes to other notes, yes, there is a slight spirit of leather, kind of burned leather, maybe some fire, but not so much grilling and smokiness and barbecue as I was thinking. Overall, it's a pretty clean fragrance. When it comes to the tea is a mix of grilled hojicha tea, pu'er, and yunnan. And I do love strong black teas, so this one was not an exception. The only thing that I was worried about is the description of the fragrance that included lapsang souchong. And this is the tea that I really hate because to me it smells like grilled fish. Fortunately, that note of something grilled and burned is very subtle in the tea, and it does not remind me of grilled fish at all. So in fact, I really enjoyed that smokiness in the tea Modern Nomad. The fragrance that caught my attention as absolutely unique is Aesthetic Turbulence. And this fragrance is indeed really unusual. When it was presented to me, they don't let you smell the blotter. They just put a fan close to your face. So this way you smell the sillage of the fragrance. And when I smelled that sillage, I was like, wow, this is something that really awakens my imagination and creates so many associations in my head. The main theme that I got in my head was sunset in Japan. A very hot evening, somewhere in the countryside where you have the smell of dried grass and something that is like steaming in the air. And the second idea that I had in my head was autumn and ikebana, romanticized in my head, and I was thinking like, it's something that I wish I could smell like that. So when I got the sample, I was actually really curious to try it on my skin. And I was certain I would love it because I did like that sillage when I tested it in the salon. So I sprayed Aesthetic Turbulence all over my neck, and this was a moment of turbulence for me because I was drowning in this scent. My first impression of the fragrance was that it is a chypre fragrance. I was getting rose and patchouli and some spiciness, but when I saw the description, I'm like, this is absolutely not what I thought it was. In fact, there are some notes that make you think of patchouli. The first impression is wrong. The fragrance can go in so many different ways. When I smell it now of the blotter, I do get that jasmine licorice combination that really stands out. And I think that's the combination that can make someone think of tea notes, which I personally don't really get on my skin. But there are definitely some spices that they blend in so well. And I don't associate them with spices to cook with. I associate them with the smell of dried leaves and ikebana. This is really an association I cannot get out of my head. The fragrance was presented to me as a favorite fragrance for redheads and artists. I've never heard such description as well. Nonetheless, it's a very complex fragrance that can go in so many different ways, and I really recommend you trying it if you're searching for something unique. When it comes to tea, here we are dealing with the jasmine, pearl tea, and oolong. This is a delicate green blend, so it requires being brewed in water that is not too hot. So here I still have some left in my little bag. The flavors of this tea are really delicate. I would say that this is an interesting take on oolong tea. It does have that flavor of oolong that I really like. Not a creamy kind of oolong, but more on the jasmine side. And at the same time, there is an interesting spiciness. When they say it's a floral spicy tea, the spicy part is probably a bit exaggerated. This is just a nice version of a green jasmine oolong tea. Really pretty nonetheless. The next tea really intrigued me with its name, Voluptuous Seduction. The bottle has a beautiful cherry color, and I was thinking this would be something related to cherries, but no. This one is a rosy perfume. Here I have a little sample. And despite that I'm not a big lover of roses, I actually found this perfume really, really interesting. I would even put it in the category of rose perfumes that I actually like. And the reason I like it is probably because of a very fresh green apple that mixes really nicely with roses and kind of changes roses for me, makes them lighter, fresher. I notice that I do like this combination. The pyramid is also really unusual. I don't think I've seen any similar pyramid in any other fragrances. Here we are supposed to be smelling rooibos tea, truffles, different kinds of roses. But in reality, I would say that this is a simple fragrance. At least it's much simpler than I would have imagined it. I definitely get the freshness of that apple. It actually makes me think more of a apple juice, like a very basic apple juice. But it smells so delicious. The base is very light, woody, but kind of woods that you almost don't feel. Probably ambroxan type of woods. When it comes to tea, rooibos is very different from any other kind of tea. It's a totally different plant. And it only grows in Africa, in South Africa. Supposedly has many health benefits, but it's not my favorite kind of tea. I drink it very, very rarely. I still did enjoy drinking rooibos of the state of mind. A little thing to be noted about this particular tea is that they added some dried apples. But I think rooibos itself is much stronger. So the dried apples, they stay really on the background. They don't really have much of a flavor to add in this composition. The next pairing is French Gallantry. The description says that the perfume could serve as a model of harmony. To me, it actually is not harmony. To me, the fragrance has two parts that are very different. I'm not sure they blend into harmony together. In fact, I like the first part and I dislike the second part. Maybe that's why I'm a bit biased about this. I really love the opening of this fragrance. It's a sweet mix of different herbs. When I read the description, I did not think that I would like all these herbs, especially in the mix. There's basil, tomato leaf, sage, thyme. And I was thinking it's a bit too much. And in fact, that's the part that I love because it's a sweet and very harmonious herbal bouquet. The part that I dislike is what they call ambery woody, slightly animalic. And we also find leather in the description. So that's the part I dislike. And that comes from modern ambers. By now you probably all know that I'm not a big fan. But it is a very trendy scent in this sense. And I think it could be appreciated both by ladies and gentlemen. The reason I say that there is no harmony is because I have a feeling that this herbal bouquet is really nicely presented. And then it's sort of suppressed by that woody animalic accord that just expands and, as most ambers, just destroys other notes. That's the reason I say that there is no harmony in here for me. When it comes to the tea French gallantry, it's actually totally the opposite. My general preference always goes towards black tea. Here as a base we have a black tea from Kenya, which is a classic that I absolutely love. Very often I start my morning with a Kenyan black tea, but I was thinking that it might be too much complicated with all these herbal notes that are in the description, especially woody and leathery notes that I already disliked in the fragrance. I was thinking that I would find them in my tea as well. In fact, drinking the tea French gallantry was a little bit of a nostalgic experience for me, because in Russia we have a black tea with thyme that is very, very common. So here, despite that we have different complex notes in the description, in fact, that note of thyme really dominates and it's not very strong. So overall, I would say that it's a really good black tea just with a little note of thyme. And the perfume number 12 has an Italian name. It's called FANFARONE Italiano, which means braggart and swaggerer. This one does not have tea pairing. This one is inspired by coffee. Unfortunately, I did not get a sample of that coffee, but during my meeting with the team, I got a chance to smell it off the jar. And I'll tell you, this coffee was the most chocolatey coffee I've ever smelled. In fact, the smell of chocolate is so intense that I think it might be artificially flavored, but I'm not very certain about that. So when it comes to the fragrance, the name makes you think of an Italian man, very handsome, sitting in a coffee place, sipping his espresso. But the coffee note in here is not as strong as Italian espresso. In fact, it's very subtle. And I personally prefer it not to be so loud. The thing is that this fragrance is designed as unisex, but in reality it feels more masculine. And I think the main reason of it is that it has something that makes me think of old-fashioned cologne. Maybe Neroli is guilty of this. I also was thinking that there might be bergamot and ginger, but they are not a part of the description. The beginning of the fragrance is very loud, very masculine, and I did not like it at first. But when it settled down, I was actually charmed by this fragrance. It's a very nice coffee, slightly chocolatey, but not overly gourmand. There's also something boozy around. Tonka bean is already coming out in the middle, and it just drags you in. It's really, really beautiful. I think if I smelled it on a man, I would be under his charm. And the base was also pleasantly surprising to me. After a few fragrances that had very loud ambers that I don't really like, this one had amber that is also very soft. It doesn't disturb me. It's kind of cozy, nice. So this fragrance is more of a like, but preferably for gentlemen, I think. Well, this was a really interesting journey with the brand State of Mind. I really enjoyed most of their teas, and I did enjoy many of their fragrances. I would say that the link between the teas and the fragrances is not as strong as one would like, as I wanted. Because when you smell the fragrances, you don't necessarily have the idea that wow, this smells like a certain tea. You have to stretch your imagination to think that the note of tea is there. And even by stretching your imagination, it does not always happen. Nonetheless, I find the fragrances really unique. They don't sound like most fragrances that already exist on the market. Maybe with the exception of Oriental Opulence, that was the last one that came out. I think there are many fragrances that sound very similar, but I'm sure it will find its market, especially in the Middle East.